Now to access the parking brake adjusting rod, which is up in here above this heat shield, I took the two nuts off here. Now there's two nuts in the floor pan on the other side, but you really don't have to bother with these because you can just bend this down and then bend it back up when you're done. It's just flexible, not hurting anything. And then, so here, you see this is pretty crusty if I'm spraying it. Here, the stud. I'm going to spray that up some more, then let that sit while I work on other parts of it. But that's your access to this. You've got to take the nut off the adjusting rod, because this piece here is your pivot for both your right and left cables are built in that. Now for your parking brake cable, they go through these receptacles here, and then you'll see there's a wire tie there. So you cut that, and then it's important to remember that the lower cable is the shorter one, and that goes to the driver's side of the car, and then the top one is a longer cable here, loops around the gas tank and goes actually to the right side of the car. That's the longer side, you'll see. But just for ease of reinstallation, so you're not wondering, think top right side, bottom left side. Now for ease of removal, I'm just going to cut through these parking brake cables here and get them out of the way, and that'll give me more room to work on the adjusting rod and getting that free. Just take those pieces out of there. So now you can drop this down. You can get at your stud. What I'm going to do is put a vice grip on this end real nice and tight. And then I can put my socket wrench on this side and just work it back and forth easy. Because if you got to be careful, you can bend this adjuster rod or even break it, and you really don't want to do that, because then you're going to have to go inside the car and pull the console out. You're going to have to find yourself a new rod as well, adjusting rod, and replace it. So just take your time. This is key to some southern car, this will come right off usually, but this was kind of crusty. I'm going to take my time. You can heat them. I've heated them before, the really bad ones. Heat this up, but this is a nut with it's a lock nut because of the plastic inside it. And when you heat it, you'd be surprised, even when you got this nice and hot, that you really still got to take your time working it off back and forth, so as not to break the rod. It doesn't just zip right off of there, even when you heat that up with a torch. So I prefer WD-40, let it soak in, and then then work this back and forth on here. Just take your time, you'll get it off. These cables here in these sleeves, they'll be a little rusted. What you do is just take an old screwdriver, put it in there, and give it a few taps with the hammer, it'll come right out. Important, this right side cable goes above the gas tank strap. There's not enough clearance for it to go beneath it. You want it above. And then the cable for the driver's side, you can't see it from here, there's a little groove here. You leave space between the tank and the strap, and there's a little bracket on the strap. A little bracket on the cable that goes over the gas tank strap. There's a little slot in the tank. It's self-explanatory. It's just something to take note of when you take it out. Once the tank strap is loosened a little, you can get it out of there. And actually, if I wasn't taking the gas tank out, this is just plastic tank. There's enough give in it and enough give in the strap that you just take an old screwdriver and just tap the plastic bracket out from on top of the strap. It'll come right out. This is a better view of what I'm talking about here. This comes on the cable, this bracket that fits on top of the gas tank strap, and then in the gas tank you got this slot that it slides in. So I mentioned if you weren't taking the tank out, there's enough give in here to pop that out and then pop the new one in. Or you can loosen up the strap and slide it out. Now the passenger side cable goes above the gas tank. You can't see it here because it's here behind the heat shield. You can see it, little bracket. Just pop the cable up from there. There's a sleeve on the new cable that you'll see that the sleeve moves, so you'll have to move it just to the right place and then pop it in there. And then your cable goes behind the charcoal canister for the evap system and then runs across. Now, I put the vice grip far enough forward from the nut that I'm not damaging there's threads here under this rust, believe it or not, so I don't damage these threads, because in case you want to tighten it up past here, you don't want those damaged. Now, as bad as this looked rust wise, it helped that I just sprayed it up this morning actually, but it's actually coming loose pretty easily. So there's a lot of surface rust, and it wasn't as badly rusted as I've encountered. I mean, over the years working on these in Western New York, I've had these just completely seized, and it ended up being the hardest part of the whole job, changing the cable, was getting this nut free on the adjuster. It's just tedious because I'd have to be patient so as not to break it. You don't want to rush it and break it. But anyways, this one's going to come off pretty easy. I've got it turning already. Then I'll just clean up those threads. Now, just a caution on loosening these up. Although it started moving right away, you'll find that sometimes they will, but then as you work down a little ways, it'll start jamming up on this rust that's on the end. And so you don't want to force it. You're going to have to be patient and keep working it back up on the clean thread, and then just take off a little bit at a time. And then when the resistance builds up, don't go too far, but go back again and just keep working it, because you can get it so far, lose your patience, and then just try to crank it off the rest of this here, and trust me, you'll break it. You'll find that when these parking brake cables are seized, this one on this side's not, but I found what it's easy to do is just take your grinding wheel, cut through that, and then you're going to take your screwdriver and the hammer and just pop that out. Now there's a spring back here. You just pop off with your needle nose, and then the line will pivot right off the arm here. The parking brake mechanism itself is inside your rotor. There's a little drum here, and you've got shoes. But in most cases, unless you suspect you've got a problem with those, you don't have to take that off when you're changing the cable, because the arm is right here, and you're just going to pop that off there after you get your return spring off. You don't have to go in and do anything with the shoes. Okay, the time has come to put the new parking brake cable on. I just wanted to show you. The reason I've got to change it is because, again, in states in the Rust Belt where they use salt, eventually, even though the steel line here it's coated, it appears to be coated, but you get moisture inside the casing, and then these lines will rust and they'll seize in the casing over time. And once they're seized, of course, the cables won't work. They're no good. So in an attempt to extend the life of the cables, they're not very expensive, but it's a bit of a nuisance to change them. What I'm going to do is take some of this Endura penetrant that sprays very liquid at first, and then it starts to thicken up. I'm just going to spray it down in the casing and work the cable back and forth a bit to work it down in there a little, and then they've got a rubber boot that just slips back on there. That's supposed to keep the moisture out of there, but realistically over time it just doesn't. So hopefully if I get enough of the lubricant in here, especially in these first sections, it might extend the life of the cable. That's my hope anyways. So just a little tip there. And we'll get ready to put it in. Just quickly show you this before I put the cable in. The driver's side has this little bracket or hook that goes over the gas tank strap in the little groove on the gas tank, and this moves around so you can get that in position at the right time. And then there's this plastic sleeve that also moves. You have to get that in position, but there's a round hook on the body, the cable that goes for the passenger side will go through that, and then it routes up behind the evap canister and along the axle. And there's a bracket that both of these go in up near the adjuster, and I always remember right side's on top. That'll help you get the routing right. Okay, I'm laying under here doing the parking brake cable. Kind of awkward to show you things, but see if I can. Now here's your bracket where the front of the cables go in, and like I mentioned, right side cable on top, left side on bottom. Now if I draw back here and see the heat shield goes up in here, so this driver's side cable, here's that bracket that goes over the gas tank strap, and then the driver's side cable fits in this groove in the gas tank. But what you'll notice, that heat shield goes up in this recess here, and that's where the exhaust is going to go. And so you just notice the cable, if it came straight, you'd have a problem. So what they did from the factory, you push the, put it in the groove, push the cable up from the driver's side, and right about here you get it up there in position, and then you wire tie the two together, and that'll hold this driver's side cable up above your heat shield. So I'm going to do that now. There's a couple other things I'll show you. Okay, I've got my wire tie in position, and when the shield goes in, it'll still push up a little more. So that's the idea there. And then you're important that the longer cable that goes to the passenger side goes over the gas tank strap, around this recess on the tank, it comes around the tank. That's where that bracket is with that sleeve. You slide that sleeve up and lock it in that bracket. Comes up over your tank. You push it up behind, probably the last thing you want to do, push it up behind the evap canister, between the canister and the tank. It runs along here, and then your bracket's over here. It goes, you don't want to interfere with your ABS wiring, it goes up against the tank there and leaves that ABS wiring free. So a big help again when you're taking out the old ones, just take careful note of how everything's routed, because if you've never done these, I mean, I know by heart where they go, but it may be very hard to get it back. You frustrate yourself because the routing is can be a little confusing. Once you've got your driver's side cable in position and this bracket's over the gas tank strap, and you're satisfied with the position in this groove and everything, then you can go ahead and finish tightening up your gas tank strap, and that'll snug this bracket in there in the slot is made for it. Now before I finish up my cable install, I'm going to go ahead and put the heat shield back up in position, press those lines that I wire tied up, and bolt the heat shield back up in the passageway that's made for the exhaust here for the gas tank. Important shield because your exhaust is right here by your gas tank. Now, I've got this one-piece performance exhaust. Well, it was 3 pieces, but you know, I'm not taking it apart. So normally if I just had the Saab exhaust, I'd go ahead and finish up the cables, and then the very last thing I'd do would be to put the exhaust pipes back in, because I could just slip this pipe over the axle. But because I'm not separating these pipes, I'm not going through that. This cable for the driver's side doesn't go on top of the heat shield. The ones in the front do. The cables go over the heat shield. But back here, this cable actually goes under your exhaust and heat shield. So I'm just going to leave that free for now. It comes out from under the tank. I'm going to leave it free until I get my exhaust back up where it belongs. But right now I'm going to go ahead and put the heat shield back up in place. But I'm not going to reconnect the exhaust muffler up here yet to my flex pipe, because I need access to the adjuster for the parking brake. It's up over that other heat shield. And so the procedure you want to do is that's going to be the very last thing, is to put on the adjuster, because you're going to need your slack and the cable to hook it over the arm. Okay, I'm getting ready to put the heat shield back in, the one that protects the gas tank. There's 3 studs for it. I like to spray these up with a lubricant to keep them from rusting. Make ease of removal in the future. Big fan of that. So the heat shield can go up now. I'll just press where I wire tied the parking brake cables. I'll push them up, get the shield in place, and then the driver's side cable will go under the exhaust, whereas the front of the cables goes above the heat shield. So I'm going to leave this for now. Important to note also, the very last thing you'll do is hook it up with your adjusters. You want to do everything in the back first, because you're going to need your slack to hook it up in the back. Now on these, let me just show you. Here's the passenger side. You got this little slider. And there's a bracket back here for that. And then you've got your arm back here you're going to hook it on. Now, the pivot here, on mine, I sprayed it up, but I think it's a bit rusted, it could be seized or sticking. So I'm going to actually take this pivot out and the pin and clean that all up real nice, so that it's important that this pivot works freely, because it's really an actuator for the brake shoes. So before I can finish up the cable, I'll be doing that. Just wanted to show you these parking brake actuators. These were actually seized. Kind of soak them in WD-40. Then you can put them in a vise and tap it apart. Once you get it apart, take a grinding disc. You can clean it up nice, and then lube it. And then it'll work nice. You've got this little clip goes on top there. This little clip goes on top there. But this is very important. You know, you can change the parking brake cables, but if these are seized, when the cable, this is where the cable pulls, you're not going to get a proper spread on these to actuate the shoes for the emergency brake. And this little hole here, this is where your return spring goes, so you this way. So you put on the brake, and then the return spring pulls this back. So it's very important that these are free. Okay, I've got my parking brake actuators back in and looped up. When I pull on it over here on the back side, like on the cable, see how it actuates the brake shoe. So again, very important that these are freed and looped up. Again, on a southern car, it's probably not an issue, but anywhere that you get moisture and salt in there, these are going to seize up. Another little tip on the cable, there's a little plastic sleeve that just clips in this bracket, and to get a little more tension on the bracket, you just take the hammer and tap down on a little, and that'll lock that plastic sleeve in there, and your cable slides through there. So I've got my cable hooked on the back. Now all that's left is to install the spring, return spring. Now before you put the rotor back on, there's an adjuster on the bottom, and you can go ahead and put a preliminary adjustment on it. Slide the rotor off and on so that the drum just do it to where there's drag putting the drum on, and then back it off a little so the rotor drum slides on freely. Then you'll be pretty close to where you're going to need to be. Then after you have the rotor on there, there's an access hole in the hub here and a corresponding hole in the drum that lines up with the adjuster. And you can stick a small screwdriver in there and give it just a little more adjustment. That way, if you adjust up your shoes first, putting the rotor set screw back in, the 30, I like to just take my impact driver and give it a little bit, and that snugs it up. Since if you just turn on it with the wrench and the rotor turns around, you're not going to get it tight enough. So I just like to give it a little tap. Don't overdo it, a little tap with the impact driver. Now if you rotate it to where this slot's on the bottom, that lines up with your adjuster. And see, got just a little drag on it now. And so now I can use the adjuster access through here. It's kind of hard to see, so you can shine a little light in there, or you can kind of get the feel for it. But you don't want to overdo it, because if you go too far and it's too tight, you won't be able to back it in the other direction, because there's a spring down there that rests on it and makes it pretty tough to rotate it in the opposite direction. And so then you'd need to take the drum back off, but now it's kind of tight on the shoes, and so now you're running into an issue getting it back off. So just a word of warning, it's better to be not just a little drag. Don't overdo it. Okay, heat shield is in place. 1, 2, and 3. So you see how that just snakes along there in the recess in the gas tank. So my parking brake lines are, you see why this just got to come off to do it. The lines are up above the shield now. On to the next step. Okay, I've got the final part of the parking brake cable. I've adjusted it up as the last thing. As I mentioned, first you adjust the rear shoes so there's a slight amount of drag, and then the last thing you do is your adjustment in the front here, and you pull up on your handle. You know, you get a, you want it to come up a little less than halfway maybe, and that should be about right. So I put this other heat shield over the center muffler, put that back in, put a little lube on the two nuts so they'll come off next time easily. And I hooked my center muffler back up to the flex pipe. While I had everything apart, I painted the exhaust as well.